What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Another Turnover, the basketball podcast where a basketball fan with zero basketball credibility gives his opinions on what's going on in the NBA. Opinions that nobody asked for. As always, I'm your host, Mr. Chris Aaron Murphy, aka AA Ron. And ladies and gentlemen, for the first time in 2026, let's just jump right into it. Folks, good to be back. We are back with, of course, Season 6, Episode 9. This is the 102nd episode. Like I said, for the very first time in 2026, I definitely missed all of you over the holidays, all 10 of y'all over the holiday season. But, it was a good time with family and friends, and I hope it was the same for you. But we are back. First episode of 2026. We're going to start off with a bang. We got lots to talk about. Of course, biggest piece of trade news. Trae Young is no longer an Atlanta Hawk. He's been traded to the Washington Wizards, so we'll get into that. I want to talk about how serious the recent Oklahoma City Thunder slump is. And then a report that just came in earlier today, that Ja Morant is apparently on the trading block. So we'll get into all of that for this episode. So like I said, let's talk about it. Trae Young has been traded to the Washington Wizards. Four-time All-Star Trae Young has been traded to the Washington Wizards for CJ McCollum and Corey Kispert formerly now of the Washington Wizards. So ESPN's Mark Stein was the first one to report on this. And I'm not going to lie, when I first heard the news, my initial thought was the Washington Wizards. I was like, why would Trae Young want to go to the Wizards? I know it ultimately wasn't his choice because he didn't have a no trade clause, but why would he want to go to the Washington Wizards? Is there something that I'm not seeing? I know the Wizards are hardly ever on TV or hardly ever talked about in the media, but I'm like, they're not a contender. Probably a worse contender than the Atlanta Hawks right now. So usually when an all-star player gets traded, they want to go somewhere where they could contend. Obviously, this is not the case here. So that was my initial thought was, doesn't he want to compete? Because he's not going to be able to do that in Washington as the roster is currently constructed. But I don't believe, as of the time of recording, Trae Young has put out a statement about his time in Atlanta. I wasn't able to find it. I didn't see anything. It has been reported that he has a $49 million player option for next season and would also this summer be eligible for a 3-year extension for the Wizards, which they would likely give him, as he, I believe, would be the only all-star on the team. But, while Trae Young did lead the Hawks back to the Eastern Conference Finals in 2021, it's crazy, it's been 5 years already, Atlanta has really never been a legitimate contender with him leading the team. I have to give him his respect, though. I'm not trying to be disrespectful. He's no scrub. I mean, you don't make the All-Star team 4 times and you're not good at basketball, right? But, NBA.com states that Trae Young is actually one of 5 players to rank in the top 10 in both points and assists since he entered the league. Other players in that same company, Nikola Jokic, MVP, Luka Doncic, MVP caliber, and James Harden, another former MVP, and then Phoenix's Devin Booker, a perennial all-star. So pretty good company to be in for Trae Young. But NBA.com also stated that the Hawks' record without Trae Young this year has actually been better. When Trae was playing, he's currently out with an injury. They were 2-8 while Trae was on the floor. The Hawks are 16-13 without him. Over the career, the Hawks have actually won nearly half of their games when Trae Young was not in the lineup, as opposed to, about 45% of the games they won when he did play. So, even though this trade, in my opinion, does not shake up the landscape of the league in any way, I mean, he went from one bottom-tier team to another bottom-tier team. It's still notable whenever an all-star does get moved. Unless Giannis ends up getting dealt before the trade deadline this season, this will likely be the biggest trade of the year, more than likely, but there's another potential one coming, like I said, that we just found out about earlier today. But nonetheless, I mean, Trae Young is now a Washington Wizard. I mean, as a Spurs fan, I'm very, very happy that this trade happened. Now, why would I say that, you might ask, as a Spurs fan? Why would I be happy that Atlanta traded Trae Young? The Spurs have the rights to several of Atlanta's draft picks. So we had a first round pick of theirs in 2025, this past draft. I think we ended up taking Carter Bryant with the Atlanta Hawks pick, if I'm not mistaken. So if the Hawks end up tanking, which they likely will, at least hopefully they will, we'll likely get a lottery pick this year, this coming up summer, 2026, which would be a pick swap. And their 2027 first round pick would be San Antonio's as well. So thank you, Atlanta, for moving on from Trae Young. I greatly appreciate it. So we can get even more assets to partner with Wembanyama. I appreciate you very much. But like I said, Trae Young is now a Washington Wizard. Crazy stuff. But let's transition. Let's talk about the Oklahoma City Thunder. So after starting off 24-1 on the year, the Oklahoma City Thunder had a rough couple of weeks, to say the least. They are 31-7, which is still a great record, still number one in the league by a sizable margin. I think they're about 4 games or 4.5 games better than the San Antonio Spurs. But over their recent 12-game stretch, they went 6-6, so a 500 team over their recent stretch, which, for most teams that, are winning as much as they do, a 500 slump really isn't that big a deal. But, they lost back-to-back games for the second time this season. Their hopes of breaking that Golden State Warriors 73-9 record are pretty much all but over. And I know none of the players came out and said that they wanted to do that, but still, people are like, oh, are they going to win 70 games? Are they going to win 70 games? That's pretty much out the window now. They lost by 27 points to a 13-24 Charlotte Hornets team at home. Charlotte came into Oklahoma City and beat them by 27 points. So a rough couple of weeks, to say the least. Now, I was talking to my wife about this, as she loves hearing about all of my basketball opinions 24/7. But she asked me, why had Oklahoma City been losing? What is the culprit for why they have been losing after winning so many games over, start of this season and, even dating back to last season? And, my wife's a very casual basketball fan, really only watches it because I do. But I basically was explaining to her the concept of, I personally think it's a bit of championship hangover. I think that's the main reason why they're experiencing this slump. And for those that don't know, championship hangover, I asked Google Gemini, to kind of sum it up in a couple sentences. So I'm going to read that here. Championship hangover in basketball describes a phenomenon where a team that has won a championship experiences a significant drop in performance in the following season. This decline can stem from physical fatigue from a long championship run, mental exhaustion, loss of key players in free agency, or a lack of motivation that the ultimate goal has been achieved. Teams often struggle to replicate their championship chemistry and intensity, facing increased pressure and a target on their back every game as opponents are eager to defeat the defending champions. That Gemini pretty much summed it up. I can't say it any better. A team like the Charlotte Hornets, come on, Charlotte should not beat Oklahoma City. I know any given night there's 82 games in the season, so you're probably going to lose one that you probably shouldn't have. But still, Charlotte beating you at home by 27 points, saying that you beat the champs, that was probably Charlotte's, motivation, just like, the Gemini definition talked about. Good motivation for a young team. They'll likely, they'll be more likely to give a better effort to beat the defending champions, just like the definition talked about. So, and that's just not Charlotte Hornets. That's, for all teams. There really is a target on your back night in and night out because every team wants to say that they beat the defending champions. So I would imagine that's pretty exhausting, getting the best effort from every single team in every single game, and inevitably there are some guys who may be struggling finding that extra motivation since they already won the big one. Last year they were striving for something. They were trying to, achieve something, but they won it. They won the big one, right? And, I don't imagine that's probably the case for Shai Gilgeous-Alexander or maybe even, J-Dub, Jay Williams, as I'm sure they would like to go back to back. But how bad do some of the role players want the same thing? They reach the mountaintop and, there's nowhere to go from the mountaintop, right? I wonder if that is a thought from some of the role players. I have no idea whether that's the case. That's just my perspective and insight on the situation. So not saying that they don't have that motivation, but we've seen time and time again where teams just don't perform as well in the season after they win the championship. It was definitely an anomaly for say in the last decade when LeBron James led Cavaliers teams and the Miami Heat were going to the finals. Like, it's very hard to go to the finals. And the fact that LeBron James led his team to go to the finals, what was it, like 8 seasons in a row or 9 seasons in a row, which is unheard of. But we have not had a repeat champion since the Golden State Warriors in 2018. They won 17 and 18. There has not been a repeat champion since then. So it's very hard to win a championship in the NBA. But so ultimately the odds are not in Oklahoma City's favor right now, to repeat as champions. Not to say that they won't or they couldn't, but it's not looking great so far. Then again, there's a lot of nuance there. I'm not counting them out. I'm not saying that they're done. I don't want that to be misunderstood. But ultimately, I don't think there's a need to panic for Oklahoma City. It's likely that they'll still finish with the number 1 seed in the league, obviously the number 1 seed in the West, and they'll more than likely probably still have a deep playoff run. But teams are of the belief and the mindset now that they are not invincible. They are definitely not invincible. They better hope that they don't match up against my San Antonio Spurs in the playoffs, because they might have some serious problems against the San Antonio Spurs in the playoffs. But I'm biased, right? So nonetheless, let's transition one more time here. I was going to go in a different direction for the show for the last segment, but there's a couple of things that I wanted to talk about. There's a report from ESPN, first off, that Giannis is affirming that he does not want to be traded or will not ask for a trade. The article on ESPN, it's titled "Giannis affirms commitment to the Bucks, would never demand a trade." I'm quoting Giannis. He said, "There will never be a chance, and there will never be a moment that I will come out and say I want a trade." Antetokounmpo told The Athletic following Wednesday's loss to the Warriors. He said, "That is not in my nature." With about a month to go before the trade deadline, Antetokounmpo reiterated his commitment to Milwaukee for the rest of the season and beyond. He said, "My plan is to be here for the rest of my career. If they don't want me, I'm not the one in charge. I am an employee." Okay, so I think there's a lot loaded into Giannis's response there. This is how I kind of took it. He basically is saying, I'm never going to demand a trade publicly. I'm never going to ask for a trade publicly. But I really think that actions speak louder than words in this situation. And I think Giannis's actions will probably speak louder than words in saying that he wants out. To say things like, I'm never going to come out and say that I want a trade. And, hey, I'm not the one in charge. I'm an employee. Like, the Bucks are not going to trade Giannis without talking to him first. Like, come on now. So essentially, if the Bucks presented to him like, look, do you want to be gone? He's probably going to be like, well, do you want me to be gone? Like, the whole Giannis has been potentially in trade talks or talked about leaving Miami for a number of years now. We talked about it on the show before the end of the year, if I'm not mistaken. So if I were a betting man after that statement, would I bet that he would be traded before the deadline? Probably not. If I had to bet, I'd say probably not. However, I don't see him being Milwaukee Buck for too much longer. If that's the summer, if that's going into the start of next season, I think, this is just my opinion, I do think Giannis's days as a Milwaukee Buck are numbered. There's too much coming out from the organization, and I know what he said, but it's like, it's deeper. When somebody tells you something, but you can just tell it's like there's more to the story there. Do I know that? Am I an NBA insider? Absolutely not. This is just my perspective. But I definitely think that Giannis's days as a Milwaukee Buck are numbered, despite what he said the other day. But then I also wanted to talk about, in the same vein, there was a story I was getting ready to record, and another story came out about the NBA, specifically another former All-Star that could be traded. Article's title says that the Grizzlies are entertaining Ja Morant trade offers. So this is from ESPN senior insider Shams Charania. The Memphis Grizzlies are entertaining offers to potentially move on from two-time All-Star Ja Morant ahead of the February 5th NBA trade deadline. Multiple teams are pursuing Morant in trade talks, and rival executives believe the Grizzlies would prioritize draft picks and young players in return. This is the first time the Grizzlies have engaged other teams in trades for Morant, who was the number 2 pick in the 2019 draft. So earlier in the season, I think it was episode 2 or maybe even episode 3, we talked about potential trade rumors surrounding Ja Morant just because of some behavior things that had happened on the court and some things he said in post game. Well, now, senior insider, now that it has come out that the Grizzlies are actively shopping him, I definitely expect that Ja Morant will probably get dealt before the trade deadline on February 5th. Now, where could he go? I've got no idea. I'm trying to think off the top of my head because I actually don't have this written down. I just have the article pulled up. I'm trying to think off the top of my head who would end up wanting to trade for Giannis. Now, I'm not saying that there's no team that would want him. I'm sure there's a team that wants him, to try to, take them over the hump. But I don't know. I'm very curious as to what you guys might think where Ja Morant could land. But like I said, it is confirmed that the Grizzlies are actively shopping Ja Morant in the trade market. So crazy stuff. I think that would probably be just as big of a trade as the Trae Young trade. Not necessarily bigger, depending on where he goes. If he ends up going to the Lakers, which very unlikely, but I'm going to be mad. I'm going to be very upset if that ends up happening. But yeah, Ja Morant is on the trading block, so we shall see where he ends up going. But ladies and gentlemen, that is all the show I have for you fine folks today. Like I always say, if you could do the good things for me, like, share, subscribe, leave comments, I would greatly appreciate it. Very excited for the show going forward in 2026. I have one particular guest that I want to get on, and I need to set some time up that I think you guys will enjoy listening to another perspective for the show. But like I always say, if you could follow Another Turnover at Another Turnover on all the socials, I would also greatly appreciate it. But be sure to stay safe, take care, and I will see you next week. Peace.